At my uncle's funeral, my cousin leaned in and whispered, "Your family's curse will swallow you next." Guests stared like it was true. Even the priest lowered his eyes. I stayed silent. Days later, when the ground split open in the forest, I dragged the curse down with me. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story had reached. The rain had already stopped by the time Ethan Carter stepped off the bus. The pavement was slick, shining under the pale glow of the streetlights that flickered along the main road of his hometown. After more than a decade away, the air here still smelled the same. Salt from the sea, damp wood, and the faint trace of smoke drifting from old chimneys. Yet tonight that scent carried something heavier, like grief pressed into the very soil. He had not planned on coming back. The town of Grayridge was a memory he had neatly folded away, buried with the childhood he never wanted to revisit. But when the call came about his uncle's death, the silence in the voice on the other end left him no choice. He had to return, no matter how many ghosts waited for him. The streets were almost empty. Only the sound of his suitcase wheels rattling across uneven stones broke the stillness. His eyes wandered to familiar places, the diner with its peeling sign, the bookstore where he once dreamed of escape, the old pier where laughter used to echo in summer. Everything stood exactly where it had always been, yet everything seemed altered, darker, as though the town itself had been holding its breath. The house appeared the same as he remembered, but smaller somehow, as if time had pressed its walls closer together. The front porch groaned under his weight, and when he unlocked the door, the smell of dust and cedar struck him like an old memory. Photographs still lined the hallway, faces smiling in frames that no longer matched the atmosphere of the house. His uncle's chair sat in the corner of the living room, empty and waiting, as if the man would walk in at any moment. Ethan placed his bag down and sat for a long while, listening to the silence. He thought about the funeral earlier that afternoon, the murmurs of neighbors offering condolences, the whispers that carried more curiosity than compassion. Everyone seemed to know something he did not, and the weight of their stares clung to him long after he left the cemetery. He tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. Memories slipped into his mind uninvited. Running through the fields with Claire Morgan, daring each other to stay longer in the abandoned mill. His uncle's voice warning him to be careful, always careful. And then there were the darker fragments, doors shutting too quickly, arguments muffled by walls, names mentioned only in anger. The night grew deeper. A storm rolled in from the coast, thunder shaking the window panes. Ethan rose and wandered into the kitchen. That was when he saw it, an envelope on the table, sealed but clearly not old. His breath caught as he picked it up. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, and unfamiliar. He opened it with trembling fingers. The message was short, written in heavy ink that had smudged across the page. "Leave before it's too late." The words hit him like a strike to the chest. His pulse quickened as he looked around the room, suddenly aware of the creaks in the house, the shadows pooling in the corners. Someone had been here. Someone who knew he would return. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly outside. He rushed to the window, but the street was empty, washed in rain and darkness. No movement, no figure waiting beneath the lamppost. Just silence. Ethan folded the note and placed it back on the table. His jaw tightened. The warning was clear, but he had spent too many years running. Whatever secret this town held, whatever truth had been buried with his uncle, he would uncover it. As the storm raged on, Ethan Carter stood alone in the dim kitchen, the letter burning like a brand in his hand. The night seemed to close in tighter around the house, and with it came the sense that something had already begun. The kind of story that refused to stay hidden, the kind that demanded blood before it was finished. The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains, casting stripes of pale gold across the wooden floorboards. Ethan Carter sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the folded note as if it might reveal more than the 4 words scrawled across it. He turned it over again and again, searching for meaning, for a clue in the loops and sharp edges of the handwriting, but it gave him nothing. The house creaked with every passing gust, as though it too remembered things better left unsaid. He needed air. The town stretched before him much as it always had, yet there was something hollow about it now. People walked quickly, heads down, their conversations clipped short when he passed. Their eyes darted toward him, then away, like they feared being caught staring. It was the same place he had grown up, yet it no longer welcomed him. At the corner of Main Street, the familiar sight of Morgan's clinic brought a bittersweet ache to his chest. Claire Morgan had always been more than just a childhood friend. She had been the one person who knew him best, who could make him laugh when everything else felt heavy. Years had passed since he last saw her, but when the door opened and she stepped outside, it felt as if time folded in on itself. "Ethan?" Her voice carried a mix of disbelief and relief. "Hey, Claire." For a moment, words failed them both. She looked older, stronger somehow, her posture firm, but her eyes soft. He caught the faint scent of lavender as she moved closer. "I heard about your uncle, I'm sorry." He nodded, though the sympathy in her tone only deepened the gnawing inside him. "I keep thinking there's more to it, Claire. Something about the way people look at me, it doesn't feel right." She studied him with that same steady gaze she had carried since childhood, the kind that could unravel his defenses without effort. "This town has a way of keeping secrets, but be careful. Some doors aren't meant to be opened." Before he could answer, the rumble of an engine drew their attention. A black SUV pulled up across the street, and Detective Samuel Hayes stepped out. The sheriff's badge on his belt gleamed in the sunlight, but his expression carried no warmth. He walked toward them, each step deliberate, as though he wanted Ethan to feel the weight of his presence. "Carter," Hayes said, tipping his hat just enough to acknowledge him. "Didn't expect to see you back here for long." "Guess I'm full of surprises," Ethan replied. The detective's eyes narrowed slightly, then flicked to Claire before returning to Ethan. "Listen, I know losing family isn't easy, but stirring up old memories won't help anyone. The town doesn't need ghosts dragged out of the ground again." Ethan felt the words like a shove. And what if those ghosts never got a chance to rest? For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the caw of a crow overhead. Then Hayes placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, firm enough to be a warning. "Let it go." The SUV roared to life again, and Hayes was gone. Claire's brow furrowed, concern etched across her face. "He's not wrong, Ethan. Digging into the past could put you in danger." "Danger's already here," he said, thinking of the note. That evening, Ethan returned to his uncle's house, restless. He searched through drawers, shelves, even the attic, determined to find something, anything that would explain why someone wanted him gone. Hours passed before he stumbled upon a small wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the storage room. Inside were faded letters, photographs, and one folded sheet of paper that looked newer than the rest. The letter mentioned names he barely recognized, people who had vanished from Gray Ridge years ago without explanation. The words hinted at debts unpaid, promises broken, and shadows that lingered even after the bodies were gone. As Ethan read, a chill spread through him. The handwriting matched the note left on his kitchen table. The realization struck hard. Whoever had warned him to leave wasn't just watching. They had been close enough to step inside his home, close enough to leave a mark. The floor creaked behind him. Ethan froze, his pulse hammering as he turned sharply toward the sound. The room was empty, yet the sense of being watched clung to him like a second skin. He closed the box and set it back down, his resolve hardening. The town wanted silence. Detective Hayes wanted him gone, and even Claire carried fear in her voice. But the truth was buried somewhere within these streets, and he would not leave until he uncovered it. As night fell over Gray Ridge, Ethan Carter stood at the window, watching the darkened town. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, curling around the corners of every building, whispering secrets he could almost hear but not yet understand. The whisper came first. Ethan Carter stirred awake in the dead of night. The sound so faint, he thought it might be the wind slipping through the cracks in the old house. But then it came again, closer this time. Curling around his name like a secret breathed directly into his ear. His heart jolted against his ribs. He reached for the lamp, but the bulb flickered once and went dark, plunging the room into shadows. He stood, every nerve alive, listening. The whispering stopped. Silence pressed in on him until the floorboard groaned softly in the hallway. Someone was inside. Ethan grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace and stepped into the hall. The shadows seemed alive, stretching longer than they should, warping as though the house itself was bending. He followed the faint scuff of footsteps down the corridor toward the back door, but when he yanked it open, the yard lay still beneath the pale light of the moon. Only the sound of waves crashing against the distant cliffs filled the air. Whoever had been there was gone. He didn't sleep again that night. By morning, exhaustion tugged at his eyes, but the unease in his chest wouldn't let him rest. Claire arrived with a basket of food, insisting he eat something. She noticed his pale face immediately. "What happened?" she asked, setting the basket on the counter. Ethan hesitated, then told her about the whisper, about the presence in the house. She listened in silence, her expression caught between worry and disbelief. "Maybe it was just your mind playing tricks," she offered gently. "You've been under a lot of strain." But he shook his head. "No, someone was here. I could feel it." Before she could respond, the distant wail of sirens cut through the quiet. Ethan and Claire rushed outside as the sound drew them toward the edge of town. A crowd had already gathered by the riverbank. Detective Hayes stood near the water, his jaw set tight. When he noticed Ethan pushing through the crowd, his expression hardened. A deputy pulled something from the river. It was a shoe, soaked and heavy, followed by the limp body of a young woman. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He didn't recognize her, but the fear in everyone's eyes told him this wasn't the first time Grey Ridge had lost someone like this. Hayes barked orders to his men, then turned toward the crowd. "Go home. There's nothing here for you." But Ethan stepped forward. "Who is she?" Hayes's eyes met his, cold and unflinching. "That's not your concern." The detective moved quickly to block Ethan's path, but not before Ethan caught a glimpse of the body being covered with a sheet. A bracelet gleamed around the girl's wrist, familiar somehow, though he couldn't place why. Back at the house, Ethan paced relentlessly. Claire tried to calm him, but he couldn't shake the certainty that the girl's death was connected to everything else. The note, the whispers, his uncle's secrets. "Do you still have that box?" Claire asked suddenly. He retrieved it from the hidden floorboard and set it on the table. Together they sorted through its contents. Old letters and faded photographs spread across the wood. Claire's hand froze over one of the photos. A group of teenagers gathered on the pier. "That's her," she whispered, pointing to a girl with the same bracelet. "Her name was Lily. She disappeared years ago." Ethan's stomach twisted. "Then how the hell did she end up in the river last night?" Claire shook her head slowly, her face pale. "Ethan, that's impossible. Lily would have been 28 by now." The weight of her words fell heavy between them. The girl in the photograph was identical to the one pulled from the river, right down to the clothes, as if time itself had folded over. A knock rattled the door. Ethan rose cautiously and opened it to find Michael Turner, the strange neighbor from down the road. His eyes darted nervously, and his hands trembled as he held out a folded piece of paper. "They know you're digging," Michael whispered. "You need to stop before it's too late." Ethan unfolded the paper. Scrawled across it in the same jagged handwriting as before were 5 words that chilled him to the bone. "You're next if you stay." Michael backed away before Ethan could question him, vanishing into the fog that rolled across the street. Ethan turned to Claire, the warning still in his hand, his pulse hammering. The walls of Grey Ridge were closing in, secrets pressing from every side. He could feel the story tightening its grip, pulling him deeper, refusing to let go. He knew one thing with absolute certainty: the town's darkness had only begun to reveal itself. And if he wanted answers, he would have to survive whatever came next. Stay with him. The night is only growing darker, and what waits ahead will unravel everything you thought you knew. Don't look away now. Follow this story to its end. The tension in Grey Ridge grew heavier with every passing day, pressing down like a storm that refused to break. Ethan Carter felt it in the way neighbors spoke in hushed tones, in the way doors shut a little too quickly when he walked past. The discovery at the river still haunted the town, but no one spoke Lily's name aloud, as though silence could erase the horror of it. Ethan carried the warning note in his pocket, its creased edges a constant reminder that whoever was watching him would not hesitate to strike. He had shared it with Claire, but even she urged caution now, her fear etched in every word. "You're chasing shadows," she said one evening as they sat in the quiet of the clinic after hours. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea, the porcelain cup clinking against its saucer. You don't know what kind of people you're dealing with. Then help me find out, Ethan replied, his voice low but steady. You've lived here. You've heard the whispers. There's something tying all of this together. Claire looked away, her lips pressing into a tight line. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it chains you to a past you can never escape. Before Ethan could answer, the clinic door creaked open. Detective Hayes stood in the doorway, his frame filling the room. His eyes scanned the space, landing on Ethan like a blade. We need to talk, Hayes said, his tone sharp. Ethan followed him outside, the night air cool against his skin. They walked down the empty street, the glow of the street lamps stretching their shadows long and distorted. Hayes stopped in front of the old bar, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Inside, Hayes ordered. The bar smelled of stale beer and wood polish, the kind of place where secrets lingered in the walls. Grace Bennett, the owner, wiped down the counter with slow, deliberate movements, her eyes flicking toward them but offering no greeting. Hayes leaned against the counter, his expression carved in stone. You've been asking questions, stirring people up. That needs to stop. Ethan's jaw tightened. You think telling me to shut up will work? You've been covering for someone. I can feel it. Hayes's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping into a dangerous calm. Careful, Carter. You don't know the half of it. Ethan stepped closer, the heat rising in his chest. Then tell me. Tell me why a girl who vanished years ago turned up in that river like she never aged a day. Tell me why my uncle died with secrets buried in his house. Because if you don't, I will find the answers myself. For a moment, the two men stood locked in silence, their breaths heavy, the tension so sharp it could break at any second. Grace cleared her throat softly, breaking the standoff. There are things this town would rather forget, she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. Violent things, things no one put in the records because it was easier to pretend they never happened. Hayes shot her a look sharp enough to silence her, but Ethan latched onto her words. What things? Grace shook her head, her eyes downcast. Not my story to tell. The detective pushed away from the counter, looming over Ethan. You're not a cop. You're not an investigator. You're just a man who came back to bury his uncle. Leave it at that before you end up in the ground beside him. Anger surged through Ethan, but before he could speak, Hayes was gone, the bar door slamming shut behind him. Grace leaned in, her voice low. He's scared. That's why he's pushing you away. Whatever's happening, it's bigger than him. Ethan studied her face, trying to read the truth behind her guarded eyes. She slid something across the bar toward him, a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Found this years ago, hidden behind one of the booths. Never knew what to do with it. Maybe you'll figure it out. Ethan unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside lay a knife, its blade stained dark with old dried blood. His breath caught. Don't ask me where it came from, Grace whispered. Don't even tell me you won't haul it here. Just be careful. The knife felt heavy in his hand, heavier than steel had any right to be. It wasn't just a weapon, it was proof, a piece of something long buried. That night, back at the house, Ethan set the knife on the table and stared at it in the dim glow of the lamp. His reflection wavered in the blade, distorted like the town itself. He thought about Hayes, about Grace's warning, about Claire's fear. Trust was a fragile thing in Grey Ridge, and he realized he no longer knew who stood with him and who stood against him. The creak of the house settled around him, but Ethan didn't flinch this time. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, the knife gleaming on the table, and whispered to himself the truth he could no longer deny. If the town wanted him gone, they would have to kill him first. Rain fell in thin, icy sheets, striking the tin roof of Ethan's uncle's house with relentless rhythm. The storm rolled across Grey Ridge like a warning, rattling windows and stirring branches against the walls. Inside, Ethan sat hunched at the table, the blood-stained knife laid before him on a folded cloth. The lamp flickered, shadows crawling over the walls like restless spirits. Every time his eyes drifted to the blade, his stomach tightened. It was a relic of violence, carrying with it the weight of an untold story. He couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had hidden it in Grace's bar had done so not out of fear, but out of guilt. Claire arrived just after midnight, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. She didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside and locking the door behind her. "You shouldn't have it," she whispered as soon as she saw the knife. "If Hayes even suspects." "I don't care what Hayes suspects," Ethan cut in, his voice rough. "This knife is part of it. I can feel it. Whoever left it behind thought someone would find it one day. Maybe they wanted the truth out." Claire's eyes glistened in the lamplight, a mix of fear and sorrow. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the cloth but pulling back before touching the weapon itself. "You think this town can survive the truth? You think people will want to hear it after burying it for so long?" Ethan leaned back, studying her with steady eyes. "What are you not telling me?" Her silence stretched, broken only by the storm battering the windows. Finally, she sank into the chair across from him, her voice trembling. "When I was a kid, there were rumors about the woods, about the river. Disappearances no one explained. They said it was accidents, wanderers, drifters passing through. But I remember names, people who belonged here, people who should have been missed." The storm roared louder, thunder rattling the glass. Ethan's pulse quickened. "And Lily?" Claire's breath caught. She looked down at her hands. Lily wasn't the first, she was just the one they couldn't bury quietly. Before Ethan could press further, a crash erupted outside. The porch groaned under sudden weight. Ethan moved fast, sweeping the knife into his jacket pocket, and motioned for Claire to stay quiet. He eased toward the door, every creak of the floorboards loud in the storm's chaos. The door shuddered as something heavy struck it from the other side. Claire gasped, clutching her mouth. Ethan grabbed the fire iron from beside the hearth, holding it like a weapon. Then, silence. The pounding stopped, replaced by the faint scrape of boots retreating into the rain. Ethan threw the door open, just in time to see a figure vanish into the dark, swallowed by trees and storm. He gave chase, rain blinding him, mud sucking at his shoes. Branches clawed at his face as he tore into the woods, heart hammering. He caught flashes of the figure ahead, a dark silhouette moving fast, almost too fast. "Stop!" Ethan shouted, though his voice was lost in the storm. The figure darted deeper, weaving through the trees until Ethan stumbled into a clearing. The storm seemed to quiet here, unnaturally still. He turned in circles, searching, but the figure was gone, like the forest itself had swallowed them whole. Breathless, drenched and shaken, he returned to the house. Claire waited inside, pale and trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "They were watching," she whispered, eyes darting to the window. "They know you have it." Ethan dropped into a chair, water dripping from his hair, his chest heaving. He pulled the knife from his pocket and set it back on the table. The storm outside clawed at the house, but the silence between them felt louder. "They can watch all they want," he said at last, his voice hard as steel. "I'm not letting this go, not now." Claire's eyes searched his, filled with a fear she couldn't mask. Yet beneath it, there was something else, reluctant resolve. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Then you need to see the journals, your uncle's journals. He kept them locked away for years. If there are answers, they'll be there." Ethan's pulse surged again. He remembered the locked trunk in the attic, the one he hadn't yet forced open. He hadn't wanted to desecrate his uncle's memory, but now hesitation felt like weakness. Without another word, he rose, taking the lamp in one hand and the knife in the other. The stairs creaked beneath his weight as he climbed, Claire following close behind. Dust hung thick in the air of the attic, the scent of old wood and mildew pressing against them. The trunk sat where it always had, its iron lock cold and stubborn. Ethan jammed the tip of the knife into the clasp, prying with every ounce of strength until it snapped with a sharp metallic crack. Inside lay stacks of notebooks, their covers cracked and yellowed with age. Ethan pulled one free, his fingers trembling as he opened it. The first page bore his uncle's handwriting, jagged and desperate. "If anyone finds this, know that Gray Ridge was never safe. We built this town on lies, and the dead will not stay buried." The words bled into Ethan's mind, chilling him to the bone. Claire drew closer, peering over his shoulder as lightning flared through the window. The past wasn't past at all, it was all waiting to be unearthed. And Ethan had just broken the ground wide open. The attic felt colder than the storm outside, a place sealed off from the world and left to fester with dust and secrets. Ethan held the lantern high, its glow trembling across beams lined with cobwebs, shadows bending as if alive. The trunk lay open at his feet, journals stacked like silent witnesses waiting for their turn to speak. He flipped another open, his uncle's handwriting fevered and erratic, words pressed deep into yellowed pages. They made me part of it, said it was the only way to keep Grey Ridge standing. But the woods remember, the river remembers, and so will the children if we let them. Ethan's chest tightened. Claire hovered close, her breath warm against his shoulder as she read along, her face paling with every line. Page after page was filled with confessions, names, dates, cryptic accounts of disappearances. The ink grew heavier in later entries, as though his uncle had written through clenched teeth. Lily wasn't supposed to be taken. She knew too much. I tried to stop it, but by then the pact was already broken. Ethan froze, his pulse crashing in his ears. He read the sentence again, slower this time, but the words didn't change. His uncle hadn't just known, he had been involved. Claire's hand landed gently on his arm. Ethan. He pulled away, rage and grief colliding inside him. He knew. He knew what happened to her, and he let it happen. The storm outside seemed to echo his fury, thunder shaking the roof beams overhead. Dust fell in trembling streams, catching in the lamplight like ash. Claire crouched by the trunk, rifling through the other journals with frantic hands. She lifted one bound in leather darker than the rest. This one, she whispered, as if afraid the house itself might hear. They opened it together. Unlike the others, it wasn't written in long passages, but in fragmented notes, maps, and crude sketches. The outline of the forest stretched across several pages, symbols scrawled along the river's bends, markings like graves or warnings. At the bottom of one page, written in jagged script, "The Hollow, where the earth never settles, where the silence has teeth." Ethan touched the word as if it might burn him. His uncle hadn't just been writing, he had been documenting, recording a place meant to remain hidden. A sound cracked through the attic silence. A floorboard groaned below them. Ethan and Claire froze, exchanging a look heavy with alarm. Someone was in the house. Ethan killed the lantern, plunging them into darkness. His breaths were shallow, heart pounding as footsteps crept across the floor beneath. Slow, deliberate. Whoever it was knew they were here. He slipped the knife from his pocket, gripping it tight. Claire's hand found his in the dark, squeezing once before letting go. Together they crouched low, waiting. The footsteps stopped directly below the attic ladder. For a long moment, there was only silence and the drumming of rain against the roof. Then with sudden force, the ladder shook as someone began climbing. Ethan motioned for Claire to retreat deeper into the attic shadows. He pressed himself against the beams, knife ready, every muscle taut. The trap door creaked open. A head rose slowly into the attic glow of the storm-filtered window. Not Hayes, not anyone Ethan recognized. A mask covered the intruder's face, plain, expressionless, carved from wood. The figure stepped fully into the attic, body lean but purposeful, gloved hands steady as they searched the dark. The journals remained scattered at Ethan's feet, their secrets exposed. The intruder moved closer. The wood mask turned toward the trunk, toward the very proof of Grey Ridge's rot. Ethan launched forward with a burst of fury, slamming into the figure with enough force to send both crashing into a stack of crates. The knife slashed upward, missing its mark but ripping through cloth. The figure grunted, retaliating with surprising strength, fists heavy and precise. They wrestled in the dust, the journals scattering under their struggle. The mask loomed inches from Ethan's face, its emptiness more terrifying than rage. Then Claire struck, swinging a rusted crowbar she had pulled from the shadows. The blow connected with a sickening crack, knocking the intruder sideways. The mask split slightly at the temple, but no cry of pain came, only a low, guttural growl. The figure staggered but didn't fall. Instead, they lunged for the trunk, scooping a handful of journals before bolting for the ladder. Ethan lunged after them, but Claire grabbed his arm. "Don't," she hissed. "You'll kill yourself." By the time they reached the trap door, the masked intruder was gone, swallowed by storm and night. The front door slammed below, the sound cutting through the rain like a gunshot. Breathless, Ethan leaned against the attic wall, fury boiling beneath his skin. They can't have it. Those journals are the only proof. Claire bent to gather the ones left behind, her hands trembling. Not all of them. We still have enough to find the hollow. Lightning flared through the window, illuminating Ethan's face, grim, determined, streaked with blood from the fight. They just made a mistake, he said, voice low and certain. They showed us how far they'll go to keep this buried, which means we're closer than ever. Claire met his eyes, and in that shared silence, something unspoken passed between them. Fear, yes, but also resolve. The hollow was waiting, and now they had no choice but to go there. The map from the journals led them out of Grey Ridge before dawn, when the mist still clung to the earth like something alive. Ethan drove in silence, his knuckles white on the wheel, the stolen fragments of his uncle's writings heavy in his pack. Claire sat beside him, clutching the crowbar across her knees, as though the weight of cold steel might be enough to ward off what awaited. The forest thickened as the road narrowed, branches clawing the windshield, shadows moving with a strange rhythm. When the map showed no more roads, they left the car behind and continued on foot. The air was colder here, the silence oppressive, broken only by the crunch of damp leaves beneath their boots. Claire unfolded the map again. Her voice was hushed, though there was no one around. It should be just beyond the ridge. He marked it as... She hesitated on the word. The hollow. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then that's where we go. The climb was brutal, the ground slick with moss and hidden roots waiting to trip them. But when they reached the ridge, they saw it, a clearing that did not belong. The trees bent away from it, forming a ring around barren earth that seemed unnaturally sunken, as if the ground itself had collapsed under the weight of secrets. No birds sang here, no wind stirred. At the center, a mound of stones rose like a crude altar. Blackened wood jutted from beneath, remnants of fires that had burned too long ago to remember. Symbols were etched into some of the rocks, spirals, crosses, and marks Ethan could not decipher. He felt it the moment they stepped inside the circle, a pressure in the air, heavy and metallic, filling his lungs with a taste like rust. Claire clutched her chest, eyes wide, but she didn't speak. Ethan approached the mound, kneeling beside the stones. His hand brushed one of the carvings, and the skin on his palm prickled as though the rock itself rejected him. Beneath the stones, scraps of fabric poked through, rotted, fragile, but human. Clothes, he whispered. Children's clothes. Claire's breath hitched. She crouched beside him, trembling fingers brushing the fabric. It's them, all of them, the ones who vanished. The ground seemed to breathe beneath them, a faint vibration that grew stronger the longer they remained. Ethan stood, scanning the tree line, his knife ready. The woods felt watchful, as though the pact his uncle had written about had never ended, but simply shifted, demanding more. From the shadows at the edge of the clearing, movement stirred. Figures emerged, silent and deliberate. Masks covered their faces, the same carved wood as the intruder from the attic. Their clothes were simple, indistinguishable from anyone in town, but their presence radiated menace. Claire's grip tightened on the crowbar. They followed us. Ethan counted quickly, 5, maybe 6. Too many. The masked figures closed in, encircling them with ritual precision. One stepped forward, taller than the rest, masked darker, carved with deeper grooves, the leader. His voice was muffled but calm. You were not meant to find this place. Ethan took a step forward, rage burning through fear. You killed them. You killed my sister. The leader tilted his head, almost curious. Your uncle tried to save her. He failed, as you will fail. Ethan's hand shook on the knife. He wanted to lunge, to bury the blade into that mask, but Claire's hand pressed against his arm, steadying him. Her eyes pleaded, not yet. The leader raised a hand. The others halted, obedient. Leave now and you may forget what you've seen. Stay and the hollow will claim you. Ethan's laugh was bitter, sharp. You think I came this far to walk away? Lightning split the sky, throwing their masks into stark relief, hollow eyes reflecting pale fire. For a heartbeat, the entire clearing seemed alive, shadows stretching like claws. The ground trembled harder. Stones from the mound shifted, some toppling to reveal what lay beneath. Skeletal remains, small and fragile, tangled together in a silent chorus of agony. Claire gasped, stumbling back, but Ethan held his ground. You can't bury it anymore. Everyone will know. The leader's voice dropped to a hiss. No one leaves the hollow with its truth. The circle tightened. Ethan and Claire stood back to back, weapons ready, breath ragged. The storm above raged louder, as if the sky itself bore witness. In that instant, Ethan knew there was no turning back. This was not a battle of strength, but of resolve, of how much they were willing to risk for the dead who had been silenced. The hollow had waited for them. Now it would decide who remained. The first strike came without warning. One of the masked figures lunged, swinging a blade meant to catch Ethan across the throat. He ducked low, the steel whistling past, and drove his knife upward, catching the man in the ribs. A muffled grunt escaped behind the mask as he collapsed into the dirt, writhing. Claire moved like she had been waiting for this. Her crowbar arced in a brutal swing, shattering another mask into splinters and sending the attacker sprawling. Blood sprayed hot and sharp in the cold air. The leader did not flinch. His hand rose again, and the remaining figures pressed closer, their silence more chilling than any war cry. They moved in perfect rhythm, like extensions of a single will. Ethan's lungs burned as he swung, stabbed, shoved. Every movement felt desperate, survival balanced on the edge of a blade. Claire stayed close, striking with precision, but for every enemy that fell, two more seemed to step into their place. The storm above roared, thunder cracking the sky wide open, wind tore at the clearing, howling like voices long forgotten. The mound of stones shifted again, bones sliding into the open like the hollow itself wanted to speak. One figure seized Ethan's wrist, wrenching the knife from his grip. Pain shot through his arm, but instinct carried him. He drove his head forward, smashing the mask, bone and wood breaking under the force. The figure staggered back, screaming. Claire shouted his name, but the sound was drowned by the sudden low hum that rose from the earth. The ground pulsed beneath their boots, alive, vibrating like a heartbeat. The symbols carved into the stones began to glow faintly, pulsing in time with the rhythm. The leader stepped closer, towering over them. His mask caught the flashes of lightning, the grooves etched deep enough to seem bottomless. His voice rolled through the clearing, not loud but commanding, carried by something older than him. The hollow does not forget. The pact remains. Blood for silence. He stretched his arms wide. The figures who still stood raised their blades in unison, circling tighter, their movements perfectly choreographed. The hum deepened, rattling Ethan's teeth, filling his head until it felt like the sound was inside his skull. Claire's grip found his hand for the briefest instant. Her eyes locked on his, fierce, unyielding. We break it. Now. The leader's gaze fell upon them, almost curious. You cannot break what you are bound to. Your uncle tried. He fed the hollow, as all must. Ethan felt the truth of it sink like ice through his veins. His uncle, desperate, cornered, had bargained with something he could never defeat. But Ethan was not him. He ripped the crowbar from Claire's hands, spun, and hurled it with every ounce of strength he had. The steel flew across the circle and struck the mound. Stones cascaded, breaking apart the crude altar, scattering bones and symbols into the dirt. The hum turned into a shriek. The ground convulsed violently, throwing several masked figures off their feet. The glowing symbols sputtered and flared, burning brighter before extinguishing in a burst of darkness that swallowed light for a breathless instant. The leader staggered, his mask splitting down the center. Beneath, Ethan glimpsed eyes, not monstrous, but human, filled with rage and terror. You fool, the man spat, voice stripped of its unnatural calm. You've undone centuries. Ethan's knife was in his hand again, though he didn't remember grabbing it. He lunged forward, driving the blade through the crack in the mask, straight into the man's throat. The leader's body convulsed, gurgled, then collapsed, blood soaking the barren soil. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. The remaining figures froze, masks tilting as though awaiting command. When none came, they backed away, step by step, until the forest swallowed them whole. The storm broke overhead, rain crashing down in torrents, washing blood and soil into rivulets that ran like veins across the clearing. The stones lay scattered, the bones exposed, raw and undeniable. Claire dropped to her knees, gasping, her hands pressed against the earth. It's over, she whispered, though the words sounded fragile, unconvincing. Ethan stood above the ruined mound, chest heaving, knife dripping red into the mud. No, he said, voice hoarse, eyes locked on the gaping wound the hollow had become. It's just begun. The ground was still breathing. The rain did not cleanse the clearing. It only smeared the blood, turned the soil into a dark paste that clung to Ethan's boots as he stood over the shattered altar. The forest was silent, yet not peaceful. The silence had weight, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Claire rose slowly, her face streaked with water and dirt, eyes weak and hollowed by exhaustion. Her fingers trembled as she pointed toward the mound. It's still moving. The stones that remained twitched, sliding against one another as if guided by unseen hands. Beneath them, the earth pulsed faintly, a steady rhythm too deliberate to be the wind or storm. Ethan crouched, pressing his palm against the wet ground. The vibration shuddered through him, burrowing into his bones. It was the same heartbeat he had felt in his uncle's journal, in every whispered warning, in every dream that clawed at his sleep. The hollow was alive, wounded but far from gone. Claire clutched his arm. We have to leave. Right now, before the soil split with a crack that silenced her. A fissure opened across the clearing, wide enough to swallow the stones. From the black seam rose a breath of air, colder than ice, carrying with it the stench of rot and something older than decay. Shapes stirred within this crack, shifting against the darkness. Not figures, not yet, but the suggestion of them. Shadows forming faces, hands, mouths. They whispered in a chorus, every voice carrying his name. Ethan staggered back, knife raised though it felt useless. The whispers pressed against his skull, urging, begging, promising. His vision blurred, and for an instant he saw his uncle kneeling before the same wound in the earth, lips moving in frantic prayer, blood dripping into the soil. Claire shook him, forcing his eyes back into the storm. Don't listen. It wants you. It always wanted you. The crack widened. Something clawed its way upward, pale fingers stretching from the dark, jointless, and too long to be human. They hooked into the mud, dragging the rest of it forward. A skull emerged, stretched, thin and eyeless, its mouth gaping wider than any bone should allow. Ethan's breath caught, but his hand steadied. For the first time since stepping into this cursed place, he felt clarity. His uncle had bargained. The masked men had served, but all of them had only fed the thing, kept it breathing. Breaking the altar hadn't ended it. It had freed it. The storm thundered again, lightning tearing the night open. In that flash, Ethan saw the choice as plain as the fissure before him. Leave and it would follow. Feed and it would grow. Destroy and he would not walk away. He turned to Claire, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes fierce despite the terror in them. Run, she froze. No, not without you. Run, his voice cracked, louder than the storm, raw with finality. Her tears vanished into the rain. She stared one heartbeat longer, then shoved his shoulder hard, as if by force she could make him stronger, and sprinted into the trees. Her figure vanished between the trunks, swallowed by shadow and distance. Ethan faced the hollow alone. The fissure yawned wider, the pale form dragging itself free, ribs clicking as they scraped against the stones. The whispers grew frantic, desperate, offering him release, power, even eternity. He gripped the knife until the hilt cut into his palm, blood mixing with the rain. He thought of his uncle's trembling words, the endless nights of fear, the way silence had strangled their family for generations. He thought of Claire's eyes, burning with life, and then he drove the blade not at the creature but into the earth itself. The ground screamed, the pulse faltered, then roared in agony as the fissure convulsed. Lightning struck the altar, shattering the stones into dust. Fire erupted from the crack, searing hot, blinding, a torrent of light that swallowed Ethan whole. The hollow's form shrieked, its pale hands reaching skyward before disintegrating into ash. The whispers choked off, replaced by silence so pure it rang like a bell. When the light faded, the clearing was still. The fissure was gone, sealed as if it had never been. Only scorched earth remained, steaming under the dying storm. Claire returned hours later, breathless, torn, mud streaking her clothes. She searched desperately, calling his name until her voice broke. But there was no body, no trace, Only the charred ground where he had stood. The forest was silent. For the first time in generations, the hollow had no heartbeat.